สวัสดีค่ะ So today we're going to talk about the overview of women's rights and gender equality in Thailand and Southeast Asia. So from your perspective, how has Thailand and Southeast Asia progressed in terms of women's rights and gender equality, especially since the Beijing Declaration in 1995?
Thank you so much for having me and for highlighting this important issue. You know, it's been 30 years since the world adopted the Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action, and it is the most progressive 12-point vision on how countries can achieve equality between women and men and girls and boys. When you're advancing on gender equality and women's empowerment, it's a zigzag.
Right.
So we have greatly improved our overall performance around girls and boys parity in education at all levels. And Thailand has greatly improved its legal protections of gender equality, from everything from the Gender Equality Act in 2015 to, of course, the Marriage Act of 2024, incredibly progressive. We see great progression in women's access to health in the ASEAN region, including in Thailand. And we see a better understanding of what measures have to happen to improve women's economic engagement in a way that's protected, Kunad, not just informal.
Right.
Now, and we see regulatory acts on the part of Thailand and the broader ASEAN community in terms of trying to combat all forms of gender-based violence, which is crucial. Now, where the challenges remain is labor force participation across the world. I think in 1993, the labor force participation globally of women and men, at 63% women, 95% men. Mm-hmm. Today, it's 64% labor force participation for women, 93% for men. Around this. So there's been a difference of 1 to 2 percentage points since 1993. That shows us globally that this is one of the most entrenched areas. And we know why that is. And it serves in the case of Thailand as well. It's what is expected of women by their communities, by their families in terms of jobs. So does the education and the expectation of the type of job you should have as a woman and a man match the market in your community? The second is going back into the home. Right. We are expected as women to perform a multitude of valued and important unpaid care, as we call it. Taking care of our parents, our grandparents, our in-laws, our children, people in our family with special needs. Women in ASEAN spend 4 times more of their time on care work than men. In the case of Thailand, because of the aging population, which is a good thing, and we're really keen that the world understand that people living longer, healthier lives is an enormous asset and benefit to the countries. But it also means there is more expectation on the care economy. So that burden, as it sometimes feels, can fall more on women, especially young women. That doesn't mean it's not a loved role, but it directly impacts our ability to be in the workplace if it's not supported, either within the household or outside. And the government of Thailand has strongly prioritized care for the elderly and the persons living with disabilities, and also trying to help young people balance the expectations of having a productive public life and a happy and safe personal life.
And with more women in leadership positions, whether it's in business or in other sectors, but then many women still have to bear with that unpaid care work, having to take care of their children, the household chores, and also the elderly members of the family as well. So why do you think this is still an issue that needs to be addressed?
I think what we saw during COVID-19 globally showed how vulnerable, both in the global north and the global south, the care economy was. There's no question that the care economy, which means hospitals, pharmaceuticals, early childhood development, support to disabilities. It's a huge, huge range of actions. It's an enormously growing sector in all countries in the world. But when the crunches come, the financial crunches at a global and national level, the burden does shift back to the old ways of doing things.
Yeah.
If you look at the numbers, men still make more than women. And I want to be clear on that. That's not that a woman and a man doing the exact same job will always make a different salary. That's not what that statement necessarily means. What it means is that men are in more leadership positions, therefore they do make more money. So when a financial crunch comes, because in the case of COVID, the expectation is that the person who earns the most will stay in the workforce and the person who doesn't will go back to the family. On top of that is the expectation that women, to be good mothers, and society will rate their mothering, unfortunately, that they want to go back and that they want to self-school their children and so forth. And that is why we still, one of the crucial reasons, despite education across the world showing almost equal women and men, boys and girls, it's not playing out in the job market in large part because of the care that has to happen.
So that is probably the reason why there are not enough female representation in many sectors, including in politics, which has been a big thing also in Thailand as well. So why do you think it's still very difficult to increase the number of women in leadership positions, especially in the political arena?
The political arena in every country in the world, Thailand is no exception, is the top of the glass ceiling that society sees in terms of its numbers. Political parties first have to draw in candidates that represent the constituents. There's a lot of assumptions by political parties, and the assumption is people want to see a strong and purposeful leader. A lot of times we hear that women, they're good at the soft things, but not the hard things. Now, there's no data to support that. You've had 2 women prime ministers. They have been as hard, as focused, and as strategic as anyone else. You do not become such a leader if you don't have those traits. But parties want to reflect what they think their constituents want. But actually, constituents, as soon as they see the role models that they want, that are different, and in this case, women, young women sometimes, they're completely fine. Because what we quickly find out is that households actually want to hear more about health, education, social welfare, care economy, how I'm going to ride out this unemployment situation in my household. How can my young people get jobs? This is what they want to hear. And there's every evidence that shows us that women politicians bring this as fiercely, if not more fiercely, than male politicians. Thailand's seen a growth in this latest. I think you're now at 16% of your parliament, or a little over 16% of your parliament. And certainly your prime minister, as I say, being a woman, is one of very few women heads of government in this region. And so it's very, very notable. Where, interestingly, Thailand's doing really well is you are above average, above global average, both in the number of women CEOs and women chief financial officers, significantly above average. 24% of CEOs and managing directors are women in Thailand. The global average is 20%, and the regional average is 13%. So you're significantly above your region.
And that's the latest statistics from UN Women, right?
Yes. And 43% of your chief financial officers are women, which is by far the best performer globally. Now, that is a very interesting reality, because often when you see a significant increase in women in the private sector, you do gradually see more women in political positions. So we are hopeful that the political parties are going to see more and more of these women leaders in their communities. These are a lot of companies that are in the throughout the country, not just based in Bangkok or Chiang Mai. and that this will translate. This is the hope. Generally speaking, what you see in the region where you've reached the near average, which the global ideal is 40% of parliaments to be female, it's when you've had temporary special measures. So it's mandated by either the electoral code or the constitution. Now, certainly the national strategy for women in Thailand has a goal of significantly increasing the number of women in elected positions, and they have a recommendation of at least, I believe, it's 30%. It's a recommendation, and they are trying to advocate with the political parties to meet it.
So is it possible that imposing gender quotas will actually work to increase that female representation in parliament, especially for the case of Thailand?
Absolutely. It's not the silver bullet, but it is crucial. And of course, one then has to get into the nature of the political structure. Is it first past the post? Is it a list system? There's different existing parliamentary systems and electoral processes that favor quotas over others. So it depends on the country, but we have supported this across the world as UN Women, and we tailor it in a way with the parties and the electoral commissions in a way that works best, because it's about the Senate, it's about the Parliament, it's about the Cabinet. And in terms of Cabinet, I believe you're at almost 22% or more. You've exceeded 22% of your Cabinet right now is women, which is excellent. It's really impressive and can grow.
And what about in other countries in Southeast Asia? How are they actually doing in terms of female representation in politics compared to Thailand?
So Timor-Leste and the Philippines are the high performers. They do have quotas in the case of Timor-Leste, and this is how this has progressed. Local officials matter a great deal. That's where you see your first role model. So having female governors, I've met one of your women governors, incredibly impressive, incredibly strategic, and a strong advocate for inclusion overall and equality overall, including for women and men. But that's the first thing that young people see, is who they see in their municipality or their governorate, their province. And on this, that's really something that in ASEAN needs to change faster. Do you know, globally right now, we say that if a girl was born today, she, at the rate we're moving on women's leadership, she would be 39 years old before she would see the same number of women and men elected in parliament. Now, we've been working on this issue since the early 20th century. That's when most democracies allowed for women to vote and participate. So the rate of change is much too slow. And when you talk to feminists, myself included, that's where our frustration rests, is it's moving much too slowly.
And because it's so stagnant at the moment in terms of trying to increase that female representation, having more women in positions of power, there has been a saying that there is this silent erosion of democracy that is affecting female politicians and also activists as well. So how do you foresee this phenomenon, especially when many countries are returning to far-right ideologies right now?
I think it's important for UN Women. We view the issue of democracy as it contains, of course, direct elections, but it's much broader than that. The more space and freedom that civil society actors, whatever that looks like, from individuals to registered organizations, have to critique, to push certain agendas, to discuss priorities, and to find common ground, that's the backbone of robust democracies. We are seeing across the region a pushback against women human rights defenders. Specific to Thailand, not necessarily, but definitely across the region. You're also seeing less financing for civil society, and that matters too, because it's very hard for civil society to do what it does at a community and national level in terms of advocating for the types of change that the communities want to see if they don't have consistent financing. This year, because of the decision of the United States government to reduce in areas its financial contributions to humanitarian aid, and the United States has played a crucial global role on humanitarian aid, and to be fair, has had to carry a significant portion of that load, perhaps unfairly at certain points, and has always done so very generously. With the decision to reduce that investment, we did a survey as UN Women of women-led organizations in humanitarian settings. Humanitarian settings are often where democracy is at its worst, yes, and its space is at its worst in terms of individual voices and collective rights and individual rights. And over 90% of these organizations have faced a significant financial pressure since early 2025, with over 70% having to already lay off a significant portion of their staff. Now, this is crucial. This is very hard to regain. When you look at what's happening in certain conflicts in this region, the role of those women-led organizations, it's crucial. Another area, and we're so pleased to see in Thailand where this progresses, is media. Media's representation of what democracy needs to look like, what democracy can be, including recognizing that women need to be editors, they need to be producers, as well as journalists, because it's those who agree on content and those who agree on focus. And again, I think Kunnan, at the start we alluded to it, it's people's belief that will tackle gender equality. That is the single hardest aspect of women and girls' empowerment, is the belief of individuals, societies, and beyond of what is appropriate and what is correct in terms of roles that women and men, girls and boys play. It holds back both genders and is very limiting, and hold back all genders because of that. And the UN is incredibly appreciative and commends Thailand for its very progressive and inclusive approach to recognizing gender as something that recognizes all people and all diversity. That's rare.
And you just picked up one word, which is called belief. And that belief varies between cultures as well. Western culture might think a certain way about women's rights, and Asian culture might think differently. And how challenging is it right now in terms of tackling that belief so that we can improve society to make it much more inclusive for both men, women, boys and girls, and even the LGBTQ community?
It is challenging, but I am a firm believer, and one of the reasons why there is a perception that there's a greater pushback right now, and I will explain the term perception. Much of the pushback that is being discussed right now in the media, we've felt for a decade. It's just been more prominent and frankly more politicized by a number of political parties in countries all over the world. No country is better or worse than that. We are seeing the far right and the far left trying to utilize women's issues and LGBTIQ issues as their issues to instrumentalize and mobilize voters. And there is no question, when it comes to the family, this is one of the most sensitive areas of negotiation in all of the global negotiations that the UN supports member states in convening, including Sustainable Development Goals. One of the most contentious issues will always be the rights of adolescent girls and the rights of women's control over their own bodies and how you define all of that. Issues of what happens inside the home. It took decades for the world to start legislating against domestic violence, in part because it was inside the home and to some legislators seen as a private family matter. Now, of course, it is seen as a crime. But that distinction is important, and the preservation of the family is crucial to societies. But often what happens is people talk about families as an ideal as opposed to what is. And what is works. And when it doesn't, the state has policies to intervene and support children, support women, support men who are in their families and being abused. So, having said all of that, belief drives change. And today, if I was to ask a room full of people from all over the world, is child marriage wrong? Everyone would likely say yes, with some caveats in the case of others. Now, having said that, if a girl was born today, she would be 68 years old before she sees the end of child marriage. So there's belief, yes, children should be protected, and then there's the fact. Then if that's the case, why are girls still being married off at such a rate that it'll be another 68 years at this rate before it's gone? Having said that, it'll be another 137 years if a girl was born today before women and girls live free of extreme poverty. So again, if I was to ask anyone, and this one, anyone, do you think it's right that girls and women live in extreme poverty? Everyone would say no. Well, why does it take 137 years before we see that go away? Again, it's about practice. It's about financing. And it's about understanding that these are not soft issues. These are what change communities' social cohesion, its stability, its prosperity, is equality in the home leads to equality outside the home. We have 1 in 10 women in the ASEAN region facing some form of violence in their life. Yeah. Now, in the case of Thailand, like the rest of the region, one of the bigger challenges is getting those cases reported so that the services that the governments and civil society and to some extent some private sector have invested in are used and that justice prevails. If you interview women who have experienced violence, the number one thing they want after they're safe is justice. And it's one of the hardest parts to achieve.
Yeah, and there are so many existing layers to tackle, right? So what would be your top recommendations for the Thai government or even other governments in Southeast Asia to improve women's rights and gender equality?
In the case of Thailand, continuing the emphasis on the care economy and continuing the emphasis on how women and men equally, young women and men equally, have productive lives, and therefore how to have that public-private sector partnership so that the care economy is both a job opportunity for women and men, but allows women and men to get into jobs. And that requires private sector engagement to support family-friendly policies. So second is the vision of Thailand and its national vision and in specific to gender equality, it's sound. They need to continue in investing on gender-responsive budgeting initiatives at the government level because that is what will hold the different ministries to the commitments that the government has laid out. And working at the community level. Community, community, community. That is where people are going to start to ask for differences, and we see remarkable change in that area. I think continuing to invest also in leadership. How can we help that transition from a really incredible level of women in leadership in private sector in Thailand into elected and appointed positions? Thailand's on a good trajectory there, but we need to continue it. But digitalization. Now, this is where Asia shines. Yep. Asia shines. You have 54% of women use the internet in Asia and the Pacific, and 59% of men. Now that's still a gap, but it's one of the smaller ones. We are seeing also the people who design AI need to be women and men. Yeah. And the way that we use AI, that needs to be dictated by an equal group of women and men because that is still dominated by young men. And the algorithms and everything that is embedded in AI is replicating the gender stereotypes we've seen for the last 100 years. Right. So it is crucial that that be given particular attention in ASEAN. It is such a progressive region in the use of AI and technology, but it needs to equally invest in the number of women and girls entering STEM education.
You just talked about AI, and actually the use of AI can actually create more opportunities for women in the workforce or in other sectors as well. So how do you foresee the challenges, especially how certain groups of women still may not have equal access to these technologies?
I think, one, it does require infrastructure. So with AI and getting women's greater leadership and AI being more representative of both women and men, the pace of change is incredible. Where we're seeing significant upticks is when countries have invested significantly in the infrastructure, such as China, to ensure that there's a more equitable access across the country of internet. Where we have to prioritize as governments, as international organizations, as the private sector, is getting young women and men and persons of all diversity into this sector, or you will not be speaking to your client base.
Right.
Simply put. And if you are young and you're in the AI sector, from my perspective, there's an even greater responsibility on your shoulders because you are meant to represent some of the most progressive thoughts that our civilization has seen. So don't replicate. Don't replicate. We need to target women's inclusion in STEM now. You are getting the graduates. Private sector needs to hire. And the governments need to invest more in enticing 16-year-old girls and boys to engage, to be in the sector. Otherwise, it's not going to change. We're already seeing the platforms are predominantly controlled on social media by men leaders. Their politics are starting to play out in these platforms all over the world. We have to be very aware of that fact. So we're behind the 8 ball. We're on the hind foot, as we say, and we need to drive this change, or it'll be too late. And young people own this now. This is theirs and their legacy to alter, and it's really important that they do recognize all diversity in the way they hire and in the way they put forward and develop the AI technologies, which are also wonderful enablers for rural women and rural men to access certain areas that they haven't been able to do before that. And we're seeing that across the region. Women who are fantastic entrepreneurs but very reticent to be seen publicly, for example, or don't feel they're good at communication. Through AI technology, we're seeing some incredible advancements so that they can, in clever and creative ways, still market their goods without that discomfort and perhaps pressure in their communities to not be such publicly seen or engaged in the way that would be more acceptable with men in the region.
Right, and what sort of changes do you hope to see in terms of women participation in the labor workforce, especially in the age of AI and digital technology?
So first is more women managers, more women designers, and throughout the companies and startups, integrating diverse workforce. Otherwise, AI, as I said, it will just replicate what we live and breathe now. And it's meant to go farther than that, is my understanding. The second would be everything that holds a woman back in protective work right now is the same in the STEM technologies and related to AI, and that's care. Again, the care economy has to be addressed. The support to the people in the home. And I really want to stress this. This is not that women don't want to be mothers or sisters or daughters. They want to be that and more. No person should have to choose between a job they love and a job they need to do and their family. It should be both, and they should be supported in that. And all of the statistics show us that the more that companies do this, the better payoff the companies themselves have. The final, I would say, is hand in hand, the tech companies, they have an obligation to tackle the social norm change as well. How are they contributing to the change? How are they pushing back against the change? Young people need to and are increasingly calling these tech companies to account, but that needs to be reflected in consumption patterns, in the way that they themselves as youth use the platforms, we do see a pushback among young men in a number of countries in the region towards women's rights. And that stems from a lot of misinformation, but it also will stem from that individual feeling they don't have job opportunities right now. And they have specific concerns that they don't feel is being heard. And that's really important that that get addressed in tandem to ensuring that women and girls' rights are protected. And unfortunately, political parties all over the world are utilizing that frustration, and it's important that it not be instrumentalized. These young men have really serious and valid concerns when it comes to their own futures, and there needs to be services that can help and discuss that. Otherwise, it does manifest itself as a pushback.
Right, and one last question. How much hope do you have for Thailand and Southeast Asia in closing the gender gap?
We have significant hope. And from the ASEAN level, I would just return back from Jakarta a few days ago. I had the pleasure and honor of meeting the Secretary General of ASEAN and a number of the leaders in the ASEAN bodies. And of course, in speaking to the different ministers and prime ministers across ASEAN, UN Women cannot meet the demand that is being put forward by the governments in terms of they want to accelerate progress. They want to understand how to unlock the lack of a progressive labor force participation rate. Having said that, across ASEAN, 61% of women are formally employed. That's excellent. But the governments also, where we've seen a significant change, is one of the first things they're asking us for is statistics. They want to be able to make the knowledge-driven decisions and policies. And they want gender mainstreaming at all levels of government. Now that's a significant difference than 30 years ago. That was not the case. So, as I say, the UN system as a whole and UN women within that are being asked to do things that we cannot possibly meet. So the demand is great. And so we're very hopeful, but it has to stay. We don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yeah. And it is hard not to get frustrated when you see harmful practices continue, when you see old arguments being resurrected when it comes to women in politics. We stay the course because the course has worked and we are progressing.
All right, thank you so much for today.